Hey people, it's April 17th and we have a 10-inch rain deficit here in South Mississippi. But these Texas roses don't mind it, they don't care, they don't need rain. And I've been getting a couple blackberries, dewberries here, and they're real sweet when you don't have a lot of rain. They're in here protected in these thorns and cactus. So I ain't gotta worry about nothing getting them. And my persimmon's got some new shoots on this side of the tree where the bugs ate it up, and it's got some blooms opened up here. And I've been watering this pawpaw so some of these will grow. It's got a lot more on them. If it doesn't get any water, it'll shed a lot of them. This is a pawpaw that I found a couple of years ago, and it was full of fruit, but it's under where the sign company bush hogs. And so they come and cut this down 2 years ago. It had nothing. If you can see, it's just got a couple of small fruit. It had a lot more small ones last month, but it threw them all off because it's not getting enough water. Cabbages are doing all right because I've been watering them, but all my rain barrels are empty now. I really need some rain coming up, maybe Sunday. I got y'all an excellent video here. If this is the first one of my movies you ever seen, this is going to be a good place to start. I'm going to put it in the folder with these last three and probably have 5 parts of this. It'll help when you're watching that. But this would be a good place to start. You won't be lost. But I used to spend a lot of time studying ancient maps, and I learned a lot from it. And when I first started studying the Old Hebrew, I could tell instantly that it was written by seamen. There was a lot of old sailors' words that had the same meaning still. But I'm going to prove to you here that the guy that drew this was a fraud. This is called Map of the Holy Land, and it's set the wrong way. It's, this is north here. The drum is south, and the miser is east, and from orb is west. And the spoon, the spin is the north. And this is what they call the land of Israel. And this is Egypt, the mouth of the Nile down here. Mizraim, the word they say is Egypt in the Hebrew Bible. And it shows the trail of the Exodus here and how they got lost for 40 days or 40 years. But the 40 is just a symbolic number, and it means time to return. The fast and walking in the desert and in the forest for 40 days or 40 years lost, and the 41st just means it's time to return. But there's many things in here that tell me this is a fraud, but this one word is going to be real easy. This is what they say is the Mediterranean Ocean, and this is the Godel. And that's the Hebrew word they say means great, the great sea, a Godel. But that's the wrong spelling, and that's not going to work. And when you see the correct spelling, it's going to fill in all the information about where the Jews really come from. This is called the map of Abraham bar Jacob. Bar, that means well in the Hebrew. When you're thirsty, you go to the bar. That's where that comes from. But it's the earliest available printed map of the region in Hebrew. The only complete example of the earliest, the 1621 map of Jacob ben Abram. And so Jacob ben was a German pastor and converted to Judaism and moved to Amsterdam to become an engraver. So as he studied, he must have studied a lot of the Hebrew language in order to draw this map. Everything in it's in Hebrew. There's nothing but Hebrew writing. So either he done figured out that Jesus was a fraud, or he figured out that he could make more money as becoming an engraver and converting to Judaism. The map was based on that of Christian Van Adderrockham, but has removed any reference to Christianity. But this language here that everybody thinks is Hebrew It's ancient German language. They've been using it for 6,000 years. And when this word's correctly spelled, it's the name of the people who created this language. And according to the interpretation, this is your bloodline, and blessed in your seed all the nations of the earth. That seed's in all of us. But what tipped me off here, up here on this first line, and there was a famine in the land, and beside the first that had occurred in the days of Abram, and went Isaac to Abimelech, father milk, father king, and placed them in Palestine. And Jerry is the word for old, geriatrics, and Jerry's place is the old Egyptian word for the bathroom. It was called Jerry's place because the old people were always there. That's the word for old. But you see here that they change it up. Here in Jacob's deception came to pass when old Isaac, is Zafin, Z cut and fini. That's your French word, when you're done, when you're finished eating. I'm finished, fini. And I think it was in 25 in that last movie where they said Ben was old. But here it's now Ben of Vandal is the older. So this is the Godel, Godel, and has a bunch of spellings. Some of them's the same, but it's always the great. It's across from mega in the Greek, great, large, in number, intensity, loudness, older. It's always, bigger, the Godel. And you see it come up several ways here. Sometimes it starts with the B, in the Godel. And there's give it an older, a greater, the great river, older, eldest. And it'll come with a word number, I think 14, 20, and 21. And here it is with the U in there, Godel, followed by the E. And no, down here at 14, 18, 19, and 20. But you'll see it spelled in 14, 20 with the L, with the UL, in Godel, with the oldest. And so I've been looking at this word for a while because I just can't place it. And, in the Greek, the G sometimes reads as an N in the word angel, and several other words, they read the G as an N. And in the Egyptian, there's a letter GN that changes up. But this word, the GDUL is the base of it. When it starts with E, just means the great, they'll say. Aloud, elder, eldest, exceedingly, great, high, mighty, more, much, noble, a proud thing. Over here is word 1420, GDULE, great things, dignity, majesty, greatness. Word origin from Gadal, just the GDL. Word 1431, to grow, become great, magnify, promote. And so it means to twist. You see it when it talks about the Tower of Babel. You always see the Tower of Babel as a twisted tower where they walk around like a screw. But it doesn't say that in the King James Version, but it uses that word, the Godel, for the tower in the Hebrew. And in Aramaic, the Godel, to twist, twine, in Arabic. And that's why I found it years ago. I knew it meant to twist. It's the screw, to twist the cord. But if this G is reading as an N, this becomes a Vendel. When it's spelt with a B, the B is the V. It's the Vandal, with the oldest, the eldest, the Vandal. It could also be spelt, with the VE as a Vandal. Great, aloud, but it's still all that base word, the Godel. But if you look up the Vandals, and you probably need to do this for your homework, just go ahead and read this whole page on the Vandals, and you'll learn more about history than anywhere else you can learn. Vandals were the Germanic people, were first mentioned in the written records as the inhabitants of what is now Poland. And I'm sure everybody can read, and go ahead and read this whole page. But there was a bunch of wars 2,000 years ago where the Vandals gave and took. But the ethnym, that's a name of the ethnic, that them people, was a Vandali, a windliness. A windlass is a winch used to tighten a rope, to pull rope. You can make it by putting a stick, a Spanish windlass, putting a stick between ropes and winding it. That's where the word wind comes from. Windlass in Old English. The etymology of the name remains unclear, but I make it all clear right here. It may stem from the Proto-Germanic adjective of wandas, twisted, turned, meaning to wind. And here they just get all off. Alternatively, it has been derived from a root wand, meaning water. And they got that total backwards. They got the wrong word, meaning water. And based on idea that the tribe was originally located near Limford, a sea inlet in Denmark. They were definitely sea people. But the stem can also be found in Old High German and Old English. Vandals, both literally meaning the Vandal Sea, and designating the Mediterranean Sea. The Mediterranean Sea used to be called the Vandal Sea. So Vandal didn't mean what it means today. Vandal was put on there after they had sacked Rome. But I'm sure this come from wind, and they were sailors. They were the first ones to use the wind in their airships, they called them. If you had a sail on your boat, it was an airship. These are Vandals here. And so you wouldn't spell this with an E. This is the Godel. If you were naming a bunch of waters, and this and that would be a Vav, Endel. So this isn't read as a G, it's read as an N. And it would be, and the Great Sea would be the Vandal. And so just this one spelling tells me that this guy didn't know what he's talking about. But if you read on down through this page of Vandals, it's pretty long here. And you'll see that they ruled the known world for a while there. They was badass sailors. And their language was called the Vandalic language. Very little is known about the oldest language. Ben Vandal, the older. And so this word here, this is handle. The H-N-D-U-L, handle. And it means, what they call you. His handle. In the CB radio, you don't use your name, you use your handle. If you get on the CB in LA, you might be talking to Saddle Tank Frank. Gunsmoke. White Dog, your handle. You always see this and called his name, in a furret, Esau, Ben Handle. What he was called. He was called the older. And they say that all Vandals that modern historians know about were able to speak Latin. And this is something that only a moron would say, because they already said very little is known about the Vandalic language. Well, the reason they thought they all could speak Latin is because that's the only ones they could hear from, because they didn't understand the Vandalic language. It's like these stupid polls they do. 98% of the people say they prefer cats. No. 98% of the people who are stupid enough to answer the phone and talk to you about it say they like cats. If we know zero about the Vandalic language, well, then it means 100% of the people spoke Latin. And so now I'm going to prove to you that this is the Vandalic language. And it's real simple. It plainly says it in just a couple words, 3 words. In the origins, the earliest mention of the Vandals is from Pliny the Elder. That's 2,000 years ago. Who used the term Vandali in a broad way to define one of the major groupings of all Germanic peoples. Tribes within this category whom he mentions are the Burgund, the red ones, the burgundy ones, the red ones, the carny, the Gothics, the Guttones. The T and the D are the same. That's where God come from. God, Goth. And the Varni, one or more Germanic peoples who originally lived in what is now northeastern Germany, near the Baltic Sea. First named in the Roman era and appeared to have survived the Middle Ages, it's proposed that in Old English they were called the Verns or Warns. And Pliny says in 77 AD he wrote there were 5 Germanic races, and one of these was the Vandals. And in the Vandals, these included the Burgundy ones, the Varnies, the Sharnies, not known from any other record, the Guttones, the Goths, the Gods. The TH in the D is the same letter. And Tacitus wrote in the Latin that none of these tribes have any noteworthy feature except their common worship of Eartha. In the Latin it says Nerthus, Nerthum, N-E is a B, means, in birth, birthum, Mother Earth, give birth to us. Everything come from Mother Earth, birthum, Eartha, Mother Earth, Nerthus, pulled along on her carriage, sitting on a double-headed eagle and pulled by a couple of heifers. In his description of Nerthus, Tacitus refers to the goddess as Mother Earth, the Earth Mother, when it gives birth. And all surviving manuscripts of Tacitus's Germania date from around the 15th century, and these display significant variation in the name of the goddess. All attested forms are in accusative cases and include Nerdum, yielding from the nominate of Nerthus, Herthum, the earth, nominative form of the earth. Several others including Nectum, Nethum, that would be the Egyptian word for Mother Earth. Nethum, that was, Neith, that's the woman that gives birth. A couple movies ago I talked about that. You'll catch it here in the first word of creation. I'll leave the link right up here at the end if I forget it here. That's the first word in the Greek Bible. On the first day, and God said, Janith, make day, and Janith rolled over, and the sun shined. But the other Greek word they use for this is Gaia, like a G-U-Y-A, a Gaia.
Gaia.
The earth goddess, Mother Earth, Terra Matra. On the first page, in the beginning, created God the heavens and the earth, not Gaia, Erts, E-A-R, H-A-R-T-S, H-A-R-C-H, Herch. And I will give to your descendants all the lands, the Herts, at call Herts. And these shall be blessed in your seed all the nations of the earth. The nations is Gaia. A G-U-Y, they try to say that's a Goya, coming from Goyim, which is usually a G-U-I-M. But that's Gaia, a G-U-I-I, a Gaia. And call Gaia Earth. So there's only one people that called Gaia Earth. In the Latin it was Terram Matrum, the Earth Mother, but they called it Nertham. None of these tribes have any noteworthy feature except their common worship of Eartha. And it verse of rock, the rock that you're on, and it verse, with the spoken, and it verse of rock called Gaia, Earth. So if you do your homework, you read up on this page of the Vandals, and somewhere in here, when it's talking about the language, it says this Vandalic language was the Teutonic. One of these writers down here says that if it's not here, it'll be here on this warning. Surviving versions of a third source, the 2nd century geography of Ptolemy. Ptolemy was the name of the Greeks when they ruled Egypt. Ptolemy was always the king, and Cleopatra was always the queen. There was more than one Ptolemy, more than one Cleopatra. It was the firstborn son and the firstborn daughter. And your brother, his firstborn son. If your daughter was going to be the queen, and his firstborn son, your brother's firstborn son, would be Ptolemy. She would marry him. The surviving versions of the third source, the 2nd century geography by Ptolemy, include the Varuni in their description of eastern Germania, but these are difficult to interpret and have apparently been corrupted. These describe the Varuni as being near the otherwise unknown Teutonic, the Teutons. And many movies ago, I found that in a 400-year-old encyclopedia, and it talked much about language. But it said the Teutonic was the first language, and all the other languages come from that. And this apparently had become corrupted. This is what it talks about in the Tower of Babel, and God came down, the Gothics came down and changed the language. And so that's all I'm trying to do, is give the language back. And I'm going to cut this off here. Good day.